Dr. Dell Allison, I really appreciate it having you here. I cannot begin to read the totality of what Dr. James D. Tabor had to say in his question, like pointing out. But to give the idea, he's saying the earliest sources we have, Paul talked about a spiritual body. He defines it in a way that it's as different from the physical body as a seed is from, you know the quote.
Yeah.
The idea is that Paul's resurrection, or the Jesus resurrection in Paul, is some type of different kind of body, not this flesh and blood, corpse, literally, physically kind of concept. And we see a Galilee tradition in Mark and Matthew where that's where they're supposed to go. And even when they do, some of the 11 doubt. They're sitting there doubting on what they're seeing. If this was a flesh and blood body, would they be sitting there doubting? These are just questions I'm throwing out there as I'm asking this. So we see the tradition, Luke and John come later, and they really want to nail down, he ate with us, he touched my body, it's real, it's physical. And Dr. Tabor is suggesting, as I know other scholars do, this is definitely an apologetic against critics who are probably trying to say, you just saw a ghost, or this isn't true. We see that hinted at. I'm not a ghost. This is not like... and John and Luke make it literal, physical, like they really want to emphasize that. So I think Tabor is saying there's a disconnect, and the tradition the legend, if you will, has developed. Can you tell us your thoughts?
Okay, well, first of all, I argue in the book for a visionary understanding of the appearances. And I think, if I understand the question, that I agree with you that the original experiences or encounters are visionary, and also that the stories in Luke and John are a bit different. But you have to be careful here. So if you look at Matthew's gospel, we actually get the story of the rock being rolled away, but Jesus doesn't walk out. It's not like the Gospel of Peter. He's actually gone before the stone is rolled away. And Martin Luther pointed out this means that if there wasn't a back exit, he actually has somehow gone through the rock or popped out. I mean, he does have a magical, non-physical body. It can go through matter somehow. And Paul's experiences in Acts are certainly visionary, and in some way he lines them up with the experiences of others before him. I do say in the book that I am incurably skeptical about finding history in the stories in John and Luke, insofar as they emphasize the physicality. But I still think the stories in Luke and John are descendants of a proto-commissioning to the 12, and I think Matthew is related. So what's happened is it's become more physical in the process, and it does appear to me that Luke especially has the view that John Calvin later had. John Calvin had the view that Jesus, when he rose from the dead, rose in this sort of this body and remains to this day a physical being. But you have to be careful with John, because John is not like Calvin. Calvin read John 20 and was uncomfortable with it because it sounds like Jesus just pops in and that Jesus just disappears. And Calvin wanted to say he must have walked in through the door because he's got a body like you and me, and you can't do that. I think John is more mysterious here. I think he wants to emphasize physicality at the same time, but he also has a Jesus that can just pop in out of nowhere. And I think that what I see in John is not so far from what I postulate in the early church, because I'm one who thinks that the stories of the empty tomb are early. So these Christians are thinking in terms of physicality when they're thinking about the tomb, but their experiences are, I think, visionary. Now, how you put those two together, I don't really do that in the book. I don't know what to... I think I say I don't know what really ultimately to make of the empty tomb. I think it's an early story. But how to interpret it theologically or metaphysically or ontologically, I don't really know. As for Paul, though, we might have a disagreement here because I think this is my sense. I think Paul is dealing with Corinthians who probably have no difficulty with a body that's just dead, like Jesus's, going to the realm of the gods. There were Greco-Roman stories about people ascending at death, but when you're thinking about the general resurrection, then you're talking about bodies in graves that have been sitting there for years or decades or whatever, and they're just bones. And my suspicion is what the Corinthians didn't like was the notion that, rotted bodies and bones and things like that were suddenly going to come back and do something. I think Paul's trying to find a compromise here, and his compromise is, there's some sort of continuity here. There is a seed, but it gets radically transformed. So I don't read Paul to be saying there's a physical body and you just get rid of it and then you get a new body, a replacement body. I actually think what Paul's trying to do here, whether successful or not, is argue that the thing that was buried somehow gets radically transformed into something else. And I think the Corinthians probably would have been happy with that because he's saying we're not talking about flesh and bones coming back and all the rest of it. We're talking about a radical transformation.
I don't know this to be true, but I wonder if he would agree with that, because I think he says in his book, Paul and Jesus, there were a couple different things he mentioned. He talked about someone who was dead, and this was within like the Jewish milieu, that there was supposedly a man, some type of teacher who died. They knew where his corpse was, but they still said he was risen or something like that. I don't know the source. But he says that's maybe an option, but he's probably, I think, convinced with you that from reading his book, I think he thinks that there was an empty tomb. And this is Tabor. Tabor thinks there was an empty tomb, but maybe they got the wrong one or something. But the bottom line is they had this belief that it transformed. It wasn't like corpse, dead, physical, you and me, blood. It's decomposition's taking place, and then that's all right back to what we are. He does think glorious, glamorous, light, and all that. So I think he would agree with you on that. I think it's just a matter of how that developed. The church really takes that to a whole different...
Yeah, and if I understood the questions, you read the long version originally. I think it probably is a response to polemic. It is a form of apologetics, because I think what people would say was they just saw a ghost, right? And, dismiss it that way. And so at some point you have to say, well, it's different. But let me add something here, which... I have loose ends everywhere. So at the end of the book, I have a chapter called Modest Conclusions. I try to be modest about these things. One of the things that's really puzzling is that if you look at modern visions, sometimes encounters with saints, sometimes encounters with dead spouses, the people will emphasize the physicality of the experience. Mm-hmm. So you can hug a dead husband. You can kiss a dead wife. You can touch the feet of a saint who's appeared to you from heaven. The phenomenology is there. That is, people do in our time and place. Sometimes, I don't know what the percentage is here, but I've cataloged lots of these instances where people will say, wow, this wasn't just visionary, this seemed real, although if we were in the room, we might see nothing at all. I actually found one woman, maybe I found two, but I know for certain one who said it was just like Jesus and the disciples. I mean, my husband was here and I could touch him and he was real, but he just popped in and then he popped out. So again, metaphysically, ontologically, I'm not sure what the heck is going on there, but it is the case that sometimes what we call visionary experiences can seem solidly real. And so this makes it possible to wonder whether maybe some early Christian or some early Christians somewhere had something similar. I don't know that they did, but you can't exclude it as a possibility that a visionary experience could be not just ocular, but could also involve hands and bodies.
I'm going to phrase this in a way that I'd love to hear how you might respond. Just an idea. Bart Ehrman has the legendary idea about the empty tombs. He's like, for a while he thought, okay, there's really empty tombs. I think he's changed that now. He says he doesn't think that there were. It's legend. And that's okay, because some people say there's legends elsewhere, whatever. But the question would be, if he's right, we're playing a hypothetical here. If he's right that the tombs were legend.
You mean tomb plural or
yeah, tomb
singular?
I mean, yeah, sorry. If that is legend, then how would you explain the data at that point? If you personally thought, okay, the tomb is legend, there's not a historical kernel of an actual empty tomb.
Then you'd have to say it's an inference. It would be the product of later theological reflection, which decided that Jesus was not only seen, but seen because he had risen from the dead. And if he had risen from the dead, then the tomb must be empty. It is the case that while you can find in 2nd Baruch a text that is very much like Paul, that is a radical transformation of bodies, and while you can find Jewish texts in which people become like angels or become angels, so that there is the notion of radical transformation at the base of all this, you look at the texts, they are at least initially about bones and flesh and dust and earth. It's like Ezekiel 37, which by the 1st century was already understood to be about the general resurrection. So you have very physical ideas of resurrection going on. So the argument would be, from a skeptical point of view, we saw Jesus and we've inferred that he rose from the dead because we've seen him. His tomb must be empty because if you're raised, your tomb must be empty. So they would be thinking Ezekiel 37 or something like that. That makes sense. That's not what I think happened, but you can think that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I just figured I'd just throw out a hypothetical there. Thank you.